Good evening, and thank you for joining us for the last event of the day on the 5th day of the 20th anniversary edition of the Hong Kong International Literary Festival. My name is Catherine Platt, and I am the festival director. So we're running online events all of this week with a few live events as well. And this weekend, if you're in Hong Kong, you can also attend events live at Asia Society and at Tycoon. You can visit our website, festival.org.hk, for details of the program. And printed programs are also available all around town now. If you look in your nearest bookazine or other bookstore, you'll find one there. So we're delighted to be hosting this session this evening with the Korean Cultural Center, and we're very grateful to them for their support of the festival, which has made it possible for us to include tonight's authors, Francis Cha and Bae Suah, in our festival program. So the event will be in English, but also with Korean interpreting. We're very pleased to have Nicole Kim with us, and she will be interpreting for Suah between Korean and English. And also within 48 hours, we'll post a new version of this video with Chinese subtitles added. So I'll hand over to Kelly, our moderator for this evening, in a minute. I just want to run through a few points about the Crowdcast platform first. So you can post your comments in the comment box on the right, post them in English or Chinese or Korean, as whatever you're most comfortable with. And if you have a question, can you put it in the question box? If you see at the bottom of the screen where it says ask a question, click on that and a box will open where you can put your question in. And again, if you want to write it in Korean or Chinese, then we will be able to convey it to the speakers. Yeah, so put your questions there and add to the conversation. So the event will stay on Crowdcast until the end of November, so you can watch on demand. It is a free event, so please go ahead, tweet, share, tell your friends to come online and watch it with us. So just before we start, I want to thank all of our cultural partners, sponsors and donors for their generous support, which makes these events possible. In particular, as I said, we're grateful to the Korean Cultural Center for sponsoring today's talk, and I'd also like to acknowledge an ongoing grant from the Standing Committee on Language, Education and Research. So now I'm going to hand over to our moderator for tonight, Kelly Falconer. Kelly is the founder of the Asia Literary Agency. She represents award-winning Asian authors, experts on Asia, and writers living in the Australia-Asia region. Before founding the agency, she was an editor of fiction and non-fiction, working for book publishers in London, and she was the literary editor of the Hong Kong-based Asia Literary Review in 2012. So she has contributed to the Financial Times, the TLS, and the Spectator, and she has a background as a Korean cryptologic linguist, which is a very impressive thing to be. We're also pleased, as I said, to have Nicole Kim with us today, who will be interpreting. So I'm going to hand over to Kelly to introduce Francis and Suah, and I hope you enjoy the conversation. See you at the next event.
Thank you, Catherine. It's really an honor to be here, and it's great to be asked to moderate this event. Huge thanks to Hong Kong International Lit Fest for organizing this, amidst the pandemic and with all the virtual, hurdles we have to kind of jump through. But first, let me introduce our amazing authors tonight for this session. It's Bae Suah, is one of the most highly acclaimed and innovative contemporary South Korean authors. Her novels and stories are influenced by the German authors she translates, including Kafka, Sebald, and Jenny Erpenbeck, but also by the authors Clarice Lispector and Borges and others. She's gained cult status with an extremely devoted and enthusiastic fan base. Her own themes often address the sensuous interpolation of past and present, of I and thou, of life and literature. Suah's novels and stories are gifted to us in English by the most notable and award-winning translators, including Man Booker Prize winner Deborah Smith and Sora Kim Russell and Janet Hong. Francis Cha is the author of If I Had Your Face, her debut. She grew up in the United States, Hong Kong, and South Korea, attended Dartmouth College, and received her MFA from Columbia University. She was a travel and culture editor for CNN in Seoul and the assistant managing editor for Samsung Economic Research Institute's Business Journal. she divides her time between Brooklyn and Seoul. Please forgive me, but my Korean is no longer up to par. So thank God we have a lovely translator, Nicole. So I'll just get started with my questions here. It seemed and just to talk a little bit at first, it seemed almost impossible, at first to compare these two very different books. Bae Suah, writes with a certain esoteric, abstract sensibility. Francis Cha writes with a more conventional narrative style. It was as if I were being asked to compare a painting by Paul Klee to a character study by Kim Hyun Jung. But I did, after sleeping on it, find commonality, particularly in relation to this session about urban realities. And not just because both stories are set mostly in Seoul, but also because both stories are so evocative of the individual within an urban landscape. Both writers address in their own way some aspects of the existential. Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? As Miss Bae writes in Untold Night and Day, translated from the Korean by Deborah Smith. And this is a sentiment shared by the characters in Miss Cha's novel, If I Had Your Face, written in English. I've never lived in Seoul, though I have often visited. And so I cannot speak about, what it's like to, be there for a prolonged period of time. I can only begin to guess, in part by picking up, hints from these two novels, both of which I enjoyed immensely and recommend very highly to all our audience and their friends. So to begin, I have a few questions as an outsider with some insight into Korea and Korean society. So the thing about big cities, like New York, for example, is that a person can be, or Hong Kong, is that a person can be completely anonymous, even though, surrounded by multitudes. It can be blissful or terribly lonesome, depending on your point of view or state of mind. I felt from both books that a kind of aloneness, regardless of whether your characters were with friends or lovers or with family. What are your thoughts on this specifically in relation to Seoul? And then perhaps in relation to other urban realities, given that both of you are so international. So you divide your time between Berlin and Seoul, and Francis, yours between New York and Seoul. So the aloneness and, in relation to being in a major city, particularly Seoul at first.
Sure.
Francis, do you want to begin?
I'll go first.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to say hello and thank you for tuning in. And it's really so cool that it's particularly the Hong Kong festival, because I lived in Hong Kong for 4 years and then worked there in Iran. And just really, I wish I was there now. And to the Korean audience, mania, regards to your question, Kelly, I found that question because when I was writing this book, I did think a lot about the landscape of this.
Got an echo.
Sorry. Maybe I'll try to so I go back.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we could have Suah go first because there's a really bad echo from Francis.
안녕하세요.
안녕하세요.
안녕하세요. 저는 배수아라고 합니다.
Hi, my name is Bae Suah.
제 말은 에코 없이 잘 들리나요? 나는 서울에서 태어나서 자랐기 때문에 대도시의 삶에 대해서 매우 익숙해요. 그래서 운명성이나 피상적인 인간관계를 외로움으로 느낀 적은 없습니다. 그리고 외국 생활의 경험이 많지는 않지만 서울은 대도시의 속성을 굉장히 많이 가지고 있는데 특히 그 대표적인 것이 속도라고 생각해요. 그래서 언젠가 독일 친구가 저에게 말을 했는데 내가 어린 시절을 보낸 집을 보고 싶다고 했습니다. 그런데 저는 그 말이 너무 우스꽝스러운 게 제가 어린 시절을 보낸 집은 이미 아주 옛날에 모두 다 철거되고 아파트로 바뀌어버렸어요. 그것이 서울의 삶에서는 너무나 익숙한 것인데 그 독일에서는 이제 그런 상황을 잘 이해했던 거죠. 제가 유럽에서 많이 인상적으로 봤던 것은 유명한 작가들이 오래전에 살았던 시절이 여전히 보존되고 있는 점이었습니다.
I think we've lost Suah. I think we've lost Suah for a moment.
So I will just interpret up until how she's so biting very still.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for the technical help, everybody. I have my earphones in. I don't know if this makes a difference. It seems to be okay.
It helps.
Yeah.
Francis, do you want to go? Do you want to start?
Sure.
We'll bring you.
Okay.
And then Nicole, you can bring.
Yeah.
계속해서 말을 할까요?
Should I continue?
하지만 서울에서는 그런 일이 가능하지가 않습니다.
Okay, let's go with Francis. Why don't you start, and we'll then loop back to Suah. Okay.
Yeah. Sure.
Okay. Sorry.
So going back to the city question.
Aloneness and maybe isolation in the city, particularly Seoul.
So Seoul in particular,
I can't hear. Gosh. I fear we're having some technical difficulties here, folks. I'm really sorry about this. Not sure what to do about it. I know that they're working behind the scenes to get us up and running.
Hi.
Hi, Francis. You're back now.
Okay.
Okay. Please.
We just
Try again.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's because we're all joining from all over. Perhaps. Is there still an echo for you? There is still for me. Yeah. Oh dear.
Try again. Try again.
Sure. So I think because when I was in Korea looking at this book, I was sorry, the echo is just absolutely crazy. Yeah, it's still echoing. Hello.
Nicole, maybe you could.
If we just maybe and the others are starting to help, because I've been it keeps cutting out.
Okay, now Yeah, it did work okay before we started. Okay, we're back now, I think, right?
I'm scared to even try. Oh, okay. That
Okay.
sounds good. All right, fingers crossed.
Okay, go for it, Frances.
Sure.
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah. I do find that. Okay, great. So I have a very mixed relationship with cities, and I think always feeling like the other, no matter what city I am in. That's very specifically informs my writing. And when I was, for example, when I was living in Hong Kong, I had just moved from the United States, and I felt kind of out of place there for a while. And as soon as I kind of got adjusted, we moved to Korea, and I enrolled in a public Korean school. And then I moved, after attending several years of Korean school, I went to boarding school in the United States in New Hampshire. And, that my whole life I felt kind of out of place wherever I am. And in relation to the big city, for the first time, I kept reading a lot about other people who are living in cities, who feel very alone in cities. And that's how I connected to that city, actually, by reading about a lot of people alone in cities and their experiences. But when I moved back to Seoul, and I lived across the street from an office tower where it's a kind of a multi-purpose building that's very Korea specific, where a lot of people live alone, and they are not, just for background purposes, a lot of people in Korea live with their families until they get married, typically. But if you are from the provinces, or if you are from a part of Seoul that's very far away from your work, then you get an office tower and you kind of live by yourself. And every day I would see, thousands of people coming in and out of various office towers from Gangnam, where I lived and worked. And I would imagine their very isolated lifestyles the way that I often felt, when I was living alone in New York, or even to some extent when I was back in Korea and working alongside so many young people who are living by themselves. And that really kind of informed that aloneness in a city type of writing for me. Yeah, and I do find that I think about Seoul a lot, and I write about Seoul a lot in New York, and vice versa. I think about New York when I'm writing in Seoul. And I think a little bit being a bit removed from the city I'm writing about makes me miss it, and like really analyze it in a way that I can't when I'm actually there.
So the girls in your story, this is the American cover of If I Had Your Face. They live in an office tower, don't they? And that's sort of where they return to and seek solace with each other, even though they still have this kind of separate orbit, to themselves. But they do try to support each other. But I still, as you say, felt that they had that kind of aloneness seeping through, this book. So can we it's interesting as well what you said about, if you're living in New York, you're thinking about Seoul, and if you're living in Seoul, you're thinking about New York. Sometimes I feel like if you're removed from a place, it allows your imagination to, work more vividly than if you're, in situ, because you're forced to recall, the place where you were. So, you started to address this question before we had technical difficulties. Perhaps Nicole, or do you want to continue? And then Nicole, you can.
작가님 다시 아까 말씀하시던 데부터 다시 시작하도록 할까요?
네, 서울에서는 그런 작가의 집이 보존되는 것이 가능하지 않은 것이 왜냐하면 사람들이 집을 정기적으로 이렇게 철거하고 새로 짓는 걸 선호하기 때문이에요. 저는 그래서 외로움 같은 것보다도 서울에서 굉장히 대도시의 속성이라고 많이 느낀 것이 그 속도이고 새 것에 대한 어떤 열망 같은 거라고 생각을 해서 만약에 지금 대부분의 작가들은 한국에서 아파트에 주로 많이 살고 있기 때문에 아마 그들이 다 죽은 다음에는 그 집이 남아있는 일이 거의 없을 거라고 생각을 해서 그것 또한 약간 흥미로운 점 아니면 새로운 점이라고 생각합니다. 됐어요.
So born and raised in Korea, I am very familiar with urban life and urban realities. And this is what we might call aloneness, that the superficial relationship in the urban lives. Although my time of living abroad is limited, if I can name one peculiar thing about Seoul as a metropolitan city, is that it's speed. Because when you look at in Germany, it's very common to see everything that is old is well preserved. Because my German friend once asked me that he or she wants to visit where I used to live, but then it is impossible in Korea because where I used to live is already torn down to build a new apartment. This is somewhat very common in Korea and somewhat that Germans would never understand. So in Germany, all the famous authors' houses will be well preserved, but it is near impossible in Korea because people's preference and tendency toward something new. So they will tear down what is once old to build something new. And this is one thing very peculiar about Seoul as a metropolitan city. And that is why what I think you associate with as aloneness. So the speed of Seoul is something that's very unique to Korea, and its lightness toward something new. So all the writers in Korea, all the famous writers are living in apartments mostly, but I believe when they leave us, I believe where they used to live will be no longer preserved because it will be all torn down to build a new apartment. So that is something I find very interesting in Korea.
I think it's not just Korea. It is East Asia and has this out with the old, in with the new sensibility. Even if it's sort of a computer, like I remember once when I was my Mac wasn't working, and in the office I was asking where's the Mac repair shop, and they couldn't understand that I wanted to have it repaired. They just thought, well, just buy a new one. But I think also you said it's interesting what you said about this interstitial space. I suppose that it's almost like the places that used to be would become sort of a palimpsest in our imagination, right? So we remember them as they were, and that's where they're preserved in our memories, rather than the physicality of a place is not preserved, but it is emotionally preserved, isn't it? I love going to writers' houses. I went to Isaac Denison's house in Copenhagen, in the Netherlands once, and I'd like to visit her house in Africa. So I think it is a shame where you don't have. It's almost like a shrine to the writer, isn't it? The house where the writers were living. Nicole, do you want to translate that?
말씀하신 부분에 대해서 굉장히 공감을 하는데요. 이렇게 한때 있었던 장소들이 새로운 것으로 대체되는 것은 대도시의 저도 특성이라고 생각을 합니다. 그래서 과거에 있었던 장소가 이제 실제 물리적으로는 존재하지 않지만 우리의 기억 속에서만 존재하게 되는 그런 어떤 정서적인 특성을 갖게 되는 것인데요. 그 작가의 집이 잘 보존되어 있다는 것은 다른 나라에서 잘 보존되어 있다는 것은 저도 동의합니다. 저도 예전에 코펜하겐에서 한 작가의 집을 방문한 적이 있는데요. 한국에서 이런 작가의 집이 잘 보존되지 않는다는 것이 한편으로는 안타깝기도 합니다. 왜냐하면 작가의 생가라는 것은 어떻게 보면 굉장히 신성한 곳이기도 하지 않습니까?
거기에 대해서 아마 한국인은 조금 다른 생각을 갖고 있을 것 같긴 한데 지금 모든 작가들이 아파트에 살진 않아요. 대부분의 작가들이 아파트에서 이제 다른 한국인처럼 살고는 있어서 지금은 그것을 보존하려고 해도 사실 보존할 수도 없고 의미가 없어진 상태라서 한국에서는 아예 처음부터 그 작가의 집이라는 장소에 대해서 이제 아무런 보존해야겠다는 생각을 하고 있지 않은 것 같아요. 비슷한 예를 들어서 지금 현재 많이 있는 편지 문학이라는 게 이건 물론 좀 다른 얘기입니다만 사람들이 이제 유명 작가들이 서로 편지 교환을 한 것이 문학으로 많이 나와 있는데 지금은 아무도 종이 편지를 쓰지 않기 때문에 이메일을 쓰니까 그 사람이 사망하고 나면 사실 기록이 거의 남지 않게 되는 것 같아요. 그래서 편지 문학이라는 것도 비슷한 형태로 아마 곧 사라지는 장르가 되지 않을까 생각을 합니다. 이건 대도시의 특징만은 아니겠지만요.
So I think Koreans might not agree because not all the writers live in apartment, but most of the writers do live in apartments, just like all the other Koreans. So there is no meaning to preserve writers' apartments because all the other Koreans are living in the apartments. So there, people don't think about preserving a writer's house in Korea. This reminds me of something that might be a little irrelevant, but I'd like to bring to this topic. Before we had books about letters exchanged between famous writers. This was a genre before, but nowadays nobody exchanges physical written letters because nowadays people just exchange emails. But this is so it makes a disappearing genre because this has become no longer relevant to our society because people do not exchange physical letters. So that is something that I'd like to talk about in relations to urban lives.
Okay. Okay, I'm just thinking about which question. Go on, Suah, expand. Talk about it. Please go on about the letter writing. I'm interested to hear what your thoughts
편지
on that.
문학에 대해서 더 말씀하시고 싶은 부분이 있으시다면 더 말씀해 주시기 바랍니다.
저는 한국에서 편지가 굉장히 이제 사라져 버렸는데 아마 그것은 외국도 마찬가지일 거라고 생각해요. 하지만 저는 한국의 다른 작가로부터는 단 한 번도 종이 편지를 받은 적이 없고 편집자로부터도 받은 적이 없는데 독일의 편집자나 독일의 작가로부터는 종이 편지를 받은 적이 있습니다. 그러니까 그 전통이나 문화가 사라지는 스피드도 한국에서는 굉장히 강한 것 같아요. 물론 경향은 세계적으로 마찬가지예요. 다른 나라도 마찬가지일 거라고 생각합니다만 그 스피드가 굉장하기 때문에 한국 사람도 때로는 약간 현기증을 느낄 수가 있어요. 그러다 보니까 옛날에는 카프카나 그런 사람들의 유명한 편지들이 남아있어서 책으로 우리가 아직도 읽을 수 있지만 지금은 사람이 죽고 나면 모든 것이 소멸되는 것이 디지털 세상이니까 그 편지 문학도 사라지겠구나라는 생각을 제가 했습니다. 그래서 저는 그 편지 문학이라는 장르를 좋아하는 독자로서 조금 아쉽기는 해요. 그리고 옛날에 유명 작가의 애인이나 그런 사람들은 그 작가가 죽은 다음에 그 편지를 출판사에 팔아서 돈을 벌기도 했거든요. 물론 이제 처음에는 계획한 게 아니었겠지만, 근데 이제 그런 일도 이제 없을 거라고 생각해요.
So in Korea, it's hard to see written letters being exchanged. And I think this is the same for the other countries, not something that is only unique in Korea. But in Korea, I have never received a written letter on physical paper, neither from a writer nor an editor. But in Germany, I did receive physical letter from fellow writers or editors. So I think that is very unique to Korea, the speed of it, replacing the old tradition with the new customs. So although the trend goes the same for all the other countries, but the speed in Korea is very unique. So because Korea is so rapidly changing, sometimes Koreans even feel a bit dizzy about such rapid changes. So when you look at Kafka, there are many books about Kafka's letters that he wrote and exchanged with his fellow writers. But in this time of digital age, every letters and emails will disappear once that writer leaves us. So that is why I think such books about letters exchanged between writers will become something obsolete. And this is something what makes me a bit sad, because I do love reading about those old letters written by famous writers. And also, all the ex-lovers of famous writers would sometimes make profit by selling the love letters by the old authors to publishing company. But I believe this will become something that will pass soon in the near future.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I wanted. Yeah, I like that idea. But I love writing letters and receiving them, and I hadn't realized that they were so almost obsolete, I guess. And so, Frances, you must be familiar with that as well. The lack of people writing letters. I mean, we still sometimes write letters in America, don't we? But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, my mother, she has a point of writing very long cards to people that I think people are very taken aback, and they really treasure them when they receive them. But I agree. As a writer, I think we do treasure, letters. I think the most special thing that I or my family has in our possession are these love letters from my grandfather to my grandmother. And this summer, I was just going through the whole treasure trove, and there are, the letters are just, it's such a different experience than, I don't know, looking through old text messages or something. And every single letter that my grandfather wrote to my grandmother starts out with a different term of endearment. And it's actually quite extraordinary. I went through, maybe like 60 letters, and they all start out with a different term of endearment.
So nice. Yeah, my dad used to write letters to his mother every Sunday night, just a short note and send it off. And I think sort of handwriting as well is a kind of reflection of somebody's personality. Obviously, it is, because they have handwriting, interpretation experts. And my dad used to keep, or he still does, in his medicine cupboard, a bottle of pills. My grandfather was a surgeon, and it has my grandfather, who was left-handed, his writing on it. And he keeps it there as a memento of my grandfather, because it's just so, that loopy handwriting is such a vivid, evocation. It's so evocative of my grandfather. And I think that's what we lose as well, that the kind of beauty of the cursive, print. Yeah. So I want to move on a little bit. I mean, lots of food for thought here. And I'm going to loop back. We're going to go into the idea of beauty, Frances, in your novel, but let's lead it into that. And I found it interesting that both Untold Night and Day and If I Had Your Face, this loops back to being alone, address topics of abandonment, of adoption and orphans. I mean, both of you in your novels, Frances, for some of the tension you create in your novel is the slow revelation of the backstory of the main female protagonist. We're almost sort of waiting with bated breath for you to, give us the big reveal, particularly those who spent time together in the orphanage. And Suah, in the second half of your novel, you reveal that your protagonist, Yoni Ayami, was, quote, given away. Could you both speak to us about why you think this idea of the orphan has found its way into your stories? I mean, this also, as I said, relates to my first question of aloneness. I think there's other, I'm also thinking about the schism between, the two countries, North and South, but I feel like everybody who talks about that. I'm not sure that, but is it? Maybe it is relevant to this feeling of being orphaned.
제가 먼저 할까요? 예, 제가 그 아야미를 고아로 설정한 것은 좀 약간 서술에 있어서의 어떤 테크닉을 쓰려고 했던 의도가 있는데요. 한국 사회에서는 그 고아라는 것은 굉장히 큰 상징성이 있는 게 부모와 자식 간의 관계가 그 정체성을 상당 부분 구축해주기 때문이거든요. 그래서 이것은 굉장히 혈통과 관련해서 큰 힘을 발휘하게 돼요. 그것이 이제 소설을 읽을 때도 작용이 되는데, 독자들은 은연중에 이 주인공이 어떤 부모로부터 나왔는가에서부터 이 주인공의 행동이나 성격을 이제 추리하려고 하는 그런 경향이 있는 것 같습니다. 그런데 저는 그런 실마리를 주기가 싫었기 때문에 주로 쓸 때 그 주인공 그녀의 혈통에 대해서 말하지 않는 방식을 많이 채택해요. 의도적으로 이제 삭제를 하는 거죠. 그런 것의 일환으로 저는 여기서 아야미가 아주 분명하지는 않지만 이렇게 정상적인 한국 사회에서 말하는 그런 이렇게 분명하게 추리할 수 있는 그런 혈통에서 나오지 않았다는 것을 쓰기 위해서 이런 설정을 했어요.
The reason why I wrote Ayami as an orphan is my own narrative technique. Because in Korea, being an orphan carries great symbols because the relationship between parents and a child shapes one's identities greatly. So one's so-called heritage tells a lot about one's personalities and one's tendencies. And this applies to the readers as well. When they read a book and when they read about characters, they think of those characters in association with their parents. So they try to guess the characters' tendencies and characteristics based on their relationship with their parents. So I did not want to give out any hints about such parent relationship. So I intentionally deleted the information about her heritage and her background stories. So by doing that, I successfully did not give her a what's called typical Korean heritage by setting up as an orphan.
Francis.
Yeah, I completely agree with Suah about how your family really informs every part of your different relationships in Korea, in Korean society, to the point where, and it really informs your own choices that you make as a functioning member of society as well. And for me, my characters are not like orphans in the sense that both parents are dead. Actually, a lot of them do have parents and families still living, but they did spend some time together in the orphanage. And during my time volunteering at an orphanage in Korea, I did observe how this was the case for a lot of the children. They have family who come and visit them, or they are, it's a kind of a fraught relationship with the families. But because of that, because the fact that their families are still around actually causes more hurt and anguish, and an endless feeling of kind of this abandonment, and that informs a lot of these relationships that begin in the orphanage. And I was also very interested in exploring what happens if you don't have the familial pressures and the familial ties that informs relationships, and how you have to kind of function in a very different way from when you have all these pressures on you. And speaking as someone who thinks about family every single day, it's a very different reality. And for my characters, I did want to see them form a new family. I think that's very true in the current truth of Korea, where you have these intergenerational conflicts to the point where, and a lot of it is political, a lot of it is ideal as well, and you form kind of new families because familial relationships can get very fraught and estranged. And these girls kind of form their own new family, and they look out for each other and go forward in their lives to help each other get through the different tribulations of their day-to-day.
So I'm going to move on to the next question because we lost a bit of time at first. So I want to make sure we have enough time for the audience. Yeah. So This so many questions. One of my questions was about the idea of seeing, because in Suah's novel you have the blind. There's both novels address the idea of seeing as in perception of beauty, of reality, which made me recall the character of Esther Summerson in Dickens. She's also an orphan, and Esther is blind at the end of Bleak House, but I contend that her blindness is actually what allows her to see, to perceive, and to really understand the truth simply by listening and through using her other senses. And Untold Day and Night opens in an audio theater where productions are broadcast. This is the American cover, rather than performed physically on stage. There are blind characters, the man with the cane, the stick, as we say in the UK, the rheumy-eyed poet who is going blind, the unnamed blind girl. And Frances, in If I Had Your Face, I love this character, the mute character of Ara. I was trying to spell that in Korean. You know my question before. It seems an unusual Korean name, is it? And who has had her voice, I would say, stolen, from her. And obviously she's not blind, but she has the most powerful voice in the narrative, I think. And she is the most perceptive. And this also touches on the idea of beauty, an idea intrinsic to your novel, Frances. And again, looping back to Esther Summerson, whose face has been scarred by the illness that is called her blindness. And I wonder about this idea of blindness of the people who have some kind of physical stigma, I suppose, or if not stigma, but disability that becomes, a supersensory ability. And also, my next question, I'll just loop that in here, about the beauty as a quest for identity. There's so much in Korea, plastic surgery. I know it's not just Koreans who are going to the plastic surgery clinics, it's also Chinese and others. But I mean, this quest for beauty, the ideal of beauty, kind of troubles me. And I have said here that, Korea has this miracle of the Han, their rapid economic growth, lifting themselves by sheer force of will out of debt and extreme poverty. And they also now have profound societal problems, right? As we all know, a kind of suicidal loss of hope for something better. And when better, seems already to have been reached. And it seems that this quest for an ideal of beauty is, as I mentioned above, is like an existential crisis of identity. And I wondered if you could touch on, these two questions somehow, either one of them, or I'm very interested in what you might have to say about them. Suah, would you go first?
Yeah. 먼저 그 오디오 극장을 제가 소설에서 설정한 이유는, 일단 그 오디오 극장이란 장소는 내가 아는 한 한국에는 없어요. 한국에는 없는데, 그것을 설정한 이유는 과거에 이제 음악을 듣는 그 음악 감상실이라고 하는 장소가 있었는데, 거기에 가면 사람들이 극장처럼 생긴 구조에 앉아서, 그러니까 매우 좋은 최고급 오디오로 이제 음악을 감상할 수 있는 장소였어요. 근데 그것을 보고 저는 지금은 그런 장소가 아마 없는 걸로 압니다. 그런데 그것을 이제 생각하면서, 만약에 저 오디오에서 음악이 아니라 오디오 극이 이제 낭송된다면 어떨까? 그렇다면 그것은 오디오 극장이라고 부를 수 있지 않을까라고 제가 상상을 해서 이제 설정을 한 장소고요. 그리고 또 이제 미술관에 가면 요새는 그 새로운 설치 미술에서 목소리가 전시되는 경우가 있습니다. 그것도 또한 오디오 극장을 설정하게 된 이유예요. 제가 그 소리에 이제 많이 신경을 쓰게 된 이유가, 2년 전에 쭈리히에서 낭독회를 했는데, 스위스의 쭈리히에서 그때 청중들 중에 한 사람이 저에게 한국어로 텍스트를 낭독해 달라고 마지막에 요구를 했습니다. 그래서 제가 한국어 텍스트를 낭독을 했는데, 그 청중들은 대부분 스위스인이어서 한국말을 아마 알아듣지 못했을 거예요. 그런데 제가 굉장히 극적인 드라마틱한 장면을 낭송을 했습니다. 그런데 그것을 전혀 알아듣지 못한 한 스위스 작가가 나중에 너무나 열렬하게 말을 하는 거예요. 자기는 한국말을 전혀 못하지만 그것을 알아들었다고, 이해했다고 하는 거예요. 저는 그걸 너무너무 잘 이해할 수 있었습니다. 그것이 아마 소리로 전달되는 문학 텍스트가 아닐까 생각을 해요. 그리고 그 한국의 아름다움의 추구에 관한 답변은 제가 프란시스 님에게 넘기겠습니다.
So the reason why my book starts at an audio theater is because, as far as I know, there is no audio theater in Korea. But in the past in Korea, we had this thing called music room, where people can listen to music through the state-of-the-art audio equipment at a place that looks like a modern theater. And I believe there is no music room anymore in Seoul as well. And just thinking about those things that existed in the past, I was thinking, what if we could hear not just the music, but a theater, audio theater that is played at an audio theater. So that was based on my imagination. And also when you look at a gallery nowadays, there are those new installation arts where voices are displayed as installation arts. So this is something what I consider as a modern audio theater as well. The reason why I am so into the sound itself is because of my own experience. Once I had a recital in Zurich in Switzerland, and at the time one of the audience, though they don't speak any Korean, asked me to recite one of my writing in Korean. So I did, and most of the audience was from Switzerland, so nobody spoke Korean, but I recited one of the most dramatic scenes of my writing. And even though they did not understand a thing in Korean, somehow they all understood. And one of the Swiss writers came to me and talked to me with such enthusiasm that he or she could understand everything. And I deeply understood that. This is the sounds that used as a text of literature. And regarding the Korea's quest toward beauty, I'd like Francis to talk about this topic.
So going back to, before I address the topic of beauty, for me, I made my character of Ada mute because I was very interested in exploring, this. Ada's storyline follows the storyline of K-pop, and having been very immersed in that culture and the fandom myself, which is a very intense, very personal and private kind of experience of K-pop stars and their interactions with their fans. And I liked the idea of having a character be so deeply entrenched in her own world for various reasons. And she is kind of an enhanced fan in that way because she has such an intense experience, because she has trouble communicating in her real life, apart from those who are very close to her. And that's why she gets even further deeply entrenched in the fandom world. And I think for me, that was kind of a metaphor of so many youth, and not even youth. I was an older fan of K-pop, and you're kind of trying to escape your reality. And in a way, you don't even realize it, but that's what happens for a lot of these fans. And for her, it's a very concrete thing. But moving on to the topic of beauty, I do find it very interesting in the interviews after the book's publication. I have been kind of taken aback by a lot of questions that frame the question as if it's like, oh, why do Korean women get so much plastic surgery in a very negative way? The question itself is negative. And I completely understand where that's coming from, but at the same time, I think it's rather unfair, because I think it's a global, first of all, the pursuit of beauty, rewarding beauty, is a very global thing. And it is obviously in a person's innate desire and within their right to try to make their own life better. And for these women, my characters, because they're not born into wealth and status, it's very limited what you can do. And in Korea, again, like another avenue is academic success, which is why there is such a crazy pressure from a young age in performing academically. But if that is even cut off from you, and a lot of that honestly has a lot to do with wealth and status as well. The wealthier the family, the more access to private tutors, private institutions, which are very expensive. And if you don't have that, what else can you do? And that's kind of what these characters were exploring. And I think, in an ideal world, of course, everyone would be treated equally for who they are and appreciated and loved. But the reality of the world is very different from that. And I was interested in hoping that readers would understand and arrive at the end of the book understanding kind of why these women would undertake that kind of choice, even if it's such a drastic one with fallout in their lives. But that, it's a path of bettering your life, and who are we to kind of judge that, is what I was trying to go for. But I do think Koreans, there are a lot of reasons why plastic surgery is so prevalent. And one thing that kind of gets ignored, I think, and not mentioned as much, is the access of like the ready accessibility of a lot of these places. And, in America, I'm in Brooklyn right now, trying to get a simple doctor's appointment is, oh my God, so many hoops. I have yet to be able to schedule a very simple doctor's appointment because it's so complicated. But in Korea, you can just literally walk out on the street and you have access to just cutting edge, first rate facilities wherever you can go. And that includes plastic surgery, and accessibility is actually a huge factor, I think. But of course, in a homogenous society, which Korea is, for better or for worse, a very ethnically homogenous. It is, on some rate diversifying because of the labor force. But I think the contrast between people is so immediate that like the smallest difference can make a big difference in your life. And that is another aspect to the complicated reason of why the pursuit of beauty is so intense.
Have either of you read, or all three of you, have you read Bernardine Evaristo's Blonde Roots? No. She wrote that it was published about 10 years ago. It won the Orange Prize or something. And it's a kind of reversal of the idea of beauty in the West. And Blonde Roots speaks about the blonde people like me who are getting their hair dyed to look, to have dark hair and have our noses be more Asian or, African American.
Interesting.
And it's just and it's a fantastic book, often overlooked. I'd recommend it to you, particularly Frances, given that you've
I will have to look it up. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So look, I'm conscious of the time. We don't have any questions from the audience. Come on, people, be brave. But we only have 6 minutes. I think
there are 2, actually.
Are there? Where are they?
Yeah.
I don't see them. Do you?
In the questions box.
If you see them, ask a question. Okay. Oh, I see. Both authors live in other countries, Suah in Germany and Frances in the US. How does your living away from South Korea change your perspective and therefore your writing about life? Okay, and then another one, Frances, I heard that you travel to Seoul frequently to visit your mother, who you dedicated your novel to. What are some Korea-specific characteristics that your mother taught you that you would like your daughters to inherit? I think we've kind of answered the first question initially when we had our discussion about living apart from Seoul. living in New York and thinking about Seoul and living in Seoul and thinking about New York. So should we move to the second question about the Korea-specific characteristics that your mother taught you that you would like your daughters to inherit?
Yeah, actually, I was asking Suah before the event, as well about her writing routine, and she was saying something about, writing different modes of writing in different countries. So I'd love to hear that again, actually.
네, 배수아 작가님 아까 전에 글을 쓰는 루틴이 있으신지 질문을 하셨는데 그 부분에 대해서 혹시 공유해 주실 수 있을까요? 다시 한번.
예. 저는 특별히 정해진 루틴은 없는데 제가
그 독일에
네.
계실 때는 그 번역을 주로 하신다고.
한국에 있을 때는 번역을 주로 하고요. 독일에 있을 때는 주로 글을 쓰게 되는데 그 글을 쓰는 것이 꼭 독일에 있는 게 아니라 여행을 할 때, 그러니까 집을 떠나서 여행을 할 때 글을 쓰게 자연스럽게 그렇게 되는 것 같아요. 근데 그 이유는 이제 한국에서는 굳이 글을 안 쓰고 독일에서 쓰는 이유가 뭘까 생각을 해봤더니 여러 가지 이유가 있지만 아마 한 가지는 말하자면 저의 고향은 말하자면 한국어라고 말할 수 있는데 그것은 약간 우물 같은 거라서 저는 그것을 멀리서 보고 싶어 하는 것 같아요. 그러니까 제가 이 아야미가 그 알려지지 않은 밤과 하루 이 소설을 독일에서 썼는데 독일에서 이제 한국의 이야기를 쓸 때 저는 그것을 약간 거리를 두고 볼 수 있다는 점이 저에게는 큰 매력이라고 생각을 해요. 제가 글을 쓸 때. 그것이 하나의 이유인 것 같습니다.
So I do not have a particular writing routine, but I'm a translator myself, and I tend to translate in Korea and tend to write in Germany. And actually, it's not just in Germany that I write. I usually write when I'm traveling away from home. And I was wondering myself, why am I not writing in Korea, but just translating? And there are many other reasons, but I think one of the reasons why is because I consider Korea as my home. And it's like a well, so to speak. So I'd like to keep a distance from it. I'd like to keep a distance and to be able to see it more clearly. So I actually wrote this book, Untold Night and Day, in Germany. And by doing so, I think it gave me a great advantage of seeing Korea from a distance, from a far away, and thus more clearly.
And Kelly, and going to the second question about, that's such a cool question. But I think the question was about what I'd like to teach my girls and what I learned from my mother. And I think my mom taught me how to maintain a very practical outlook in life while pursuing my dreams. And she was very supportive about supporting my dream as a writer, but she was very realistic about how to support myself. And what she thinks is very important, which is the traditional, having a family and having children and all of that. So the entire step of the way, she was helping me try to figure out how to do that concurrently at the same time, and kind of strategizing with me about how to do that and providing very real help. And I would love to do that for my girls as well, kind of have a very a realistic view of what is attainable and how to keep an eye on the dream while supporting yourself.
Okay, that's very interesting. I'd like to go to another, I'm just sort of moving rapidly on to the next question. We can overrun a little bit, apparently, Catherine said, because of technical issues at first. So another question, what was the K-pop aspect of your book inspired by your own personal experience as a K-pop fan? I think you've answered that it was sort of influenced by that. Yes. So next question. I would like to ask Bae Suah how her work as a translator has influenced her writing. Was she motivated to publish her own writing after reading and translating foreign novels, or was she already writing stories before that? But I want to, loop Frances in here, because I was just reading an interview with you, Frances, about you writing in, thinking in Korean and writing in English and vice versa, and how, there's the duality of your linguistic brain fed into the way the novel was structured and the language, the particular choice of words, your particular choice of words. So can we speak a little bit about that? How has Suah's work as a translator influenced her writing, and Frances, how your bilingualism, maybe even you speak even more languages, but how that's influenced your writing?
배 작가님 질문 읽어드리도록 하겠습니다. 번역가로 일하시는 것이 혹시 글 쓰는데 어떻게 영향을 주셨는지, 이미 글을 쓰시기 전에 번역을 하셨던 건지, 아니면 번역을 하시다가 영감을 받아서 글을 쓰시게 된 건지 궁금합니다.
저는 글을 쓴 지 거의 10년 정도 지난 다음에 번역을 하게 됐습니다. 그래서 번역을 늦게 시작한 편인데요. 번역을 하게 된 이유는 이제 독일어를 배우고 싶어서 번역을 시작한 거고, 이 영향의 문제는, 그러니까 번역과 창작이 어떻게 영향을 미치는가 하는 문제는 굉장히 질문을 많이 받았는데요. 물론 제가 번역을 한 행위가 그 다음에 쓰는 저의 창작에 분명히 영향을 미치는데, 근데 그것은 누구의 영향일까 생각을 많이 해봤어요. 그러니까 원작의 영향일까, 아니면 원작을 한국어로 번역한 나의 문장이 다시 내가 창작하는 문장에 영향을 미치는 것일까. 그런데 저는 아무래도 후자 같습니다.
So actually, I started translating 10 years into my career as a writer. So I started to translate quite later on my career because I wanted to learn German. That is how I started translating. And I do get a lot of questions about how translating influences my writing or vice versa. And I do think if I translate a book, and it will influence to some degree my next writing. But I think about what actually influences my writing more, whether it is the original book that I translated or the sentences that I used to translate the original book. The creation of my own translation influencing my next creative pieces. And I think the latter is more accurate statement for my writing.
For me, I would say that, well, actually, right after my MFA, I was offered the opportunity to translate a book from the Korean into English. It's actually 황석영 작가님의 책 중에 하나, 소설을 번역을 부탁을 받았었는데요. And I attempted the first page trying the translation, and it was so difficult that I thought, oh, okay, I should just work on my own original content because it's that much easier. And I really don't know how you do it. Every time I see Nicole translating on the fly like this, it's just amazing. But everything is so difficult, and it makes you think about language in a way that, it's impossible without footnotes. And I do think about what my actual conversations are in Korean and then try to translate them into English. But in the end, I have to make a lot of choices with every sentence. And oftentimes I try to stick to what makes more sense in English, because if you directly translate, a casual conversation from Korean into English, it just would make no sense, and you can't kind of convey the underlying context and why people are saying certain things. So trying to build that into the context is very difficult, but I still think it's a lot easier than actually translating. So I have so much respect for translators.
Thank God for translators and interpreters. They bring the world to us. I don't know how much longer we're allowed to go on. Could go on for hours. I have so many questions, and I know we have more from the audience. The last question, say from the audience, is who could you two authors recommend to us, other authors who maybe inspired you or who you want to read, or they ask specifically for Korean authors. So.
Sure, I'll start. I don't know if you're interested in adoption narratives, I highly recommend Nicole Chung. She is an adoptee herself, and I think her title is All You Can Ever Know. It was a really wonderful book. And there's another writer who is not an adoptee, but she does write a bit about familial abandonment. And E.J. Koh, The Magical Language of Others, is a really beautiful book, originally written in English. And for young children, I really love Anna Kim. She's a writer and an illustrator, and she recently published a picture book called Tanbi Leads the School Parade, and it kind of opens in Korea, and it's talking about the immigrant child's experience arriving in America and not speaking the language, which I love so much.
저는 한국 작가에 대해서는 많이 말씀을 해주셨으니까 저는 제가 정말 좋아하는 다른 작가를 추천하고 싶은데요. 그 브라질 작가인 클라리스 리스펙토어는 제가 정말 좋아하는 작가이고, 그래서 반드시 한국 작가라야만 한다는 조건이 아니라면 저는 그녀를 추천하고 싶습니다. 저에게도 많은 영향을 준 작가고요.
Since Francis recommended many of the Korean writers, if it doesn't happen to be a Korean writer, I'd like to recommend a Brazilian writer. Oh, okay. Can you hear me properly now? Are there echoes?
No, we can hear you now.
Yeah, Clarice Lispector.
Is a Brazilian writer that I was inspired a lot, and I'd like to highly recommend her work.
Thank you so much. I think we've run out of time, but please just let me remind you that the event will be you will be able to watch it up until the end of November. There will be Chinese subtitles after 48 hours. Thank you to the Korean Cultural Center for helping us with the run this event, and Nicole, your brilliant interpretations, translation. Thank you to the Hong Kong Lit Fest for putting this program on, particularly Catherine and Anne and the board of directors. And not least, please, lots of clapping for Bae Suah and Frances Cha. These are her novel. These are the novels we were discussing. These are the covers in the American edition. So wonderful novels, complementary to each other. Frances, we look forward to more books from you. Congratulations on your debut. And Bae Suah, I love to see you as always, my lovely author. And bye, everybody. Thank you for joining us so much. Thank you.